Everyone in college had been talking about it, and if I'm being completely honest, the temptation to go was too great, despite the risks involved. Police had found a severed goat's head for the second week in a row, up by the rail tracks in the industrial side of town. They speculated that it was part of a ritualistic sacrifice. The heads had been found about half a mile apart, both on a Tuesday morning, which meant the sacrifice had been carried out on a Monday night. Well, it was Monday, and my friends Donnie and Jimmy were game. We dressed up warm and walked over to the eastern part of town. We saw a cop car straight away scoping the road leading to the station, but we managed to avoid being seen. It was freezing cold, but we were psyching each other up as we headed further away from the platform and kept a lookout for cameras and cops. We weren't even an hour in when something really weird happened. Firstly, it just went silent. Everything just seemed to stop, and we saw a guy who looked like he worked there just come out of his little office and run past us, up the railway tracks. He seemed panicked and signaled to us to get out of there too. Alarm bells began to ring in my head, and then Jimmy pointed something out in the distance. It took a moment, but then I saw it too. I realized straight away that we should not be there. Heading our way were what looked like 13 people wearing black robes and disturbing skull masks. We made a run for it and managed to hide to the left-hand side of the tracks. I don't think they saw us, but we could see them. I'll be completely honest here and say that I was terrified. I had never been that scared before, not even close, and then it got worse. As they walked past, we saw a woman being trailed behind them. She had a rope around her neck and she was being pulled along like she was on a lead. She was screaming and had her hands tied behind her. There was an abandoned carriage opposite us, and they went inside it. One of them began to light candles straight away, and the woman screamed so loudly that it hurt my ears. She tried hard to avoid going in, kicking the nearest cult member, but it was no good. They pulled her inside. My heart was pounding. Donnie whispered that we should call the cops, and I said to do it. In the meantime, Jimmy gathered some big stones and handed me a few. We could hear a weird language being spoken inside the train. It must have been Latin. Before I was ready, Jimmy threw the first stone, which shattered one of the windows. Although I was terrified, I threw another, and all three of us ran. We found our way out of the rail yards, and within 30 minutes, cops flooded the area. Our trespassing was forgiven because we gave detailed witness statements. Unfortunately, nobody was found in that train, not even the woman who we tried to save, in our own way. The cult mystery of our town continues to this day.
My girlfriend Terry and I hadn't had a great week, so we decided to go to this bar on the Friday night called Shenanigans. It was virtually across the street from us, and we were still new in the Big Apple, so hadn't ventured out too far yet. It wasn't too busy, and we didn't waste time knocking back the drinks, getting the week's irritations off our chests, and ended up laughing a lot, which was needed. We'd both half-heartedly quit smoking a few weeks before, but Terry's face lit up when I said I'd bought a vape for the night, and we went out back into the little beer yard to smoke it. After about a minute of being out there, this guy approached us. I knew he was going to because he just didn't stop staring at us the whole time. He was older and had an Irish accent. There was something off about him, and I didn't appreciate that he kept calling Terry a stunner, and if she were in Dublin, where presumably he was from, then all the boys would be after her. Don't get me wrong, I'm fine with somebody complimenting my girl, but he just kept saying it, and it came off as really creepy and desperate. I said it was nice to meet him and opened the door to go back inside. Unfortunately, the Dublin man followed us back in and asked what we'd like to drink. I told him that we were about to leave and said good evening, but then he frowned and asked if he could get a photo with Terry. He kept saying, just let me take a selfie with the girl, and Terry said politely that he couldn't, and we left the bar. As we crossed the street, I saw him come out as well. Then he just leaned against the wall and lit a cigarette. I didn't want him to see where we lived, so we circled the block a few times before going home to our apartment. It wasn't long before we got into bed and briefly talked about what had happened. The booze had gone to my head, and we both drifted off pretty fast. It was around 1:30 that it started. There was a loud, incessant knocking on our apartment door that scared the heck out of us. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought for a moment that I was having a heart attack, and Terry instinctively got behind me. I got out of bed and walked through the small lounge to the front door, where it happened again. I shouted out to go away and wished that our door had a spy hole so I could see if my suspicions were correct about who this was. Then the knocking stopped and I heard soft footsteps walking away down the hallway. There was no doubt in my mind that the Dublin man had been on the other side of our door. The creep must have followed us home somehow, even though we were so careful. I comforted Terry and phoned the cops, but they said that although it was odd, no crime had been committed. We stayed in New York for about a year after that, but decided that it just wasn't for us and moved back to Vermont. We still talk about that night and make sure the door is always locked.
My boyfriend Mark and I were touring the Everglades back in 2016, staying wherever we could at night, to go hiking again the next day. At one point we got a little stuck, but saw on Google Maps that there was a cheap hotel not too far from where we were, which was honestly in the middle of nowhere. We were a little concerned as it didn't say it was actually open, but we made our way there and saw that it was in the middle of a swamp, built high up on stilts. There was a small rowing boat on the shore and a sign that told us to row on over. So we did. Luckily for us, we were met with a semi-warm welcome. There was a big guy named Gus who was cleaning dishes as we showed up. He was surprised to say the least to see us and kept saying it was late so we'd better get in. We tied up the boat and climbed a ladder into the swamp hotel. Although I didn't know Gus at all, I could tell that something was bothering him. Even as he made us a huge pot of gumbo, he kept looking out to the swamp and frowning, as if it was offending him or something. He also said once or twice that the hotel was closed during the spring, and the website had obviously glitched as it was early April. He was only there to do repairs during the day. As the sun went down, he said it was best to get inside. We thought that was a bit weird as we were adults and had grown up in the South, but it was his hotel and he was doing us a favor. Mark and I had a small but comfy room that looked out over the swamp. I fell asleep easily enough, but woke up at around 3 a.m. and then it started. There was a loud splashing, like hundreds of fish or gators in the water. I stood up and opened the door into the lounge area, but then saw Gus through the window. He was sitting out on the balcony with a shotgun. This baffled me, until I saw what was in the water below us. I don't know what they were exactly. They might have been human once, but not anymore. There were hundreds of them. I let out a gasp, and Gus turned his head slightly. He told me that we were safe up here and to go back to bed. I did what he said and of course woke up Mark. I pointed out of our window and he was just as shocked as I was. We watched those things all night. They were searching or hunting for something, but never found it. In the morning, we were woken to the smell of bacon and eggs. Neither Mark or I slept much, so we were a little groggy, but we said good morning and sat out there with Gus, who smiled and asked if we enjoyed the show last night. It was a relief that he mentioned it first, as we had many questions, but he didn't go into great detail about what we saw, as he didn't really know that much himself. He told us that it happened only in the spring, and the native tribes in the area were terrified of these creatures, who they said were neither man nor animal, but something in between. We left the hotel after that and headed back to Atlanta with a healthy new respect for the Everglades, having witnessed firsthand the dark side of nature. We said in our review of the hotel that it was quite an experience, but better avoided in the spring months,